Just outside the entrance to the grounds of the pumpkin house, my friends and I all gathered, excited to go into the haunted house. Tell was smiling and chatting with Dylan, who was relieved to be a part of it all. Summer and Autumn chatted among themselves, like normal, and Fallen Grace sat on my shoulder. Outside the grounds, we could hear creepy carnival music from inside the part of the park that was the countryside. We're here. I can't believe we're all here, I said as we all eagerly waited in the line to get into the haunted house. When it was finally our turn to get in, the sun was setting and the sky was in twilight, the darkest it got around this area. The smell of funnel cake, pumpkin pie, kettle corn, and fresh earth filled the air. The memories of every haunted house, every carnival, and every warm autumn moment filled my mind with all of those smells. It's been years since I've been to the pumpkin house, and it is the first time I get to go with my big sister, Fallen Grace. What do you want to visit first? I asked her while she was practically buzzing with excitement on my shoulder. There's few places she can be out publicly, but in this place, beyond the veil, she is safe, and she isn't even in the top 100 weird things people would see here. Just standing in line, there were stranger people ahead of us. Directly in front of the docent was a hunched-over werewolf. The hair was a deep and dark gray. They stood over 3 meters tall with a long snout and sharp teeth, who was also delicately parsing out senti to the docent. Behind the werewolf was someone who had an extremely elongated neck that bent much like a snake, and who smiled at us, and we smiled back. She looked like one of our professors, but we were smart enough not to ask. Sometimes you see school staff outside of school functions, and you don't want to necessarily accuse them of being where you're at, because it's admitting you're at that same place. Just behind the woman with the long neck was a very scared looking couple. They both wore very strange hats that made it look like they had two black circles on top of their heads, almost like mouse ears, and they kept whispering to each other, and they kept staring at everyone around them, including me and Fallen Grace. I waved at them and they quickly turned away. Maybe they got lost and they're asking for directions? It is strange for someone to react so harshly to someone trying to be friendly. I don't bite, Fallen Grace said to them, only for the woman to awkwardly answer back. We sab gid hala. I tilted my head and I turned to everyone else. Does anyone speak Gothic? Ingvaanic? I asked the group, and Summer shook her head and tried Kimru. Hello? She tried, which the woman seemed to understand. She started speaking way too quick for any of us to understand what she was saying, while Summer tried to follow along. Dunef, the man said as he reached for Fallen Grace, and I grabbed his hand before he got close. Don't grab my sister, I warned him, and Fallen Grace quietly cussed him out. The couple then got the message, and they kept talking to themselves in Ingvaanic, while we turned to Summer to translate what they were saying. They're lost, and they don't understand anyone. She thought I was speaking the same as her, but that's just what I'm getting based on context. Her language isn't like any Gothic I've heard. I did get the fact that everyone is really angry at everyone around them, she said as the couple continued to go forward and they spoke to the docent in the same language, who pointed them back to the parking lot where they muttered and they started making their way back. What was that about? I asked the docent. A familiar face from years ago, a man who is far too thin to be normal, his eyes hidden behind sunglasses, even in the dark, and he was always smiling. His pinstripe suit he wore made him look borderline skeletal as he smiled and he answered. Oh, they were just a bit lost, and they were demanding to speak to the manager about the fact they got lost heading to a completely unrelated theme park. Docent answered. What did you tell them to make them go away? I asked, hoping to have a good answer. Pumpkin House had a very low tolerance for people who refused to play along, and even less for people who were demanding things from its employees. I told them that the real manager was inside them all along and that if they wanted to reach their destination, they had to go somewhere else. They threatened to report me to their friends, but somehow, I don't care, the docent answered, and I smiled. Just what I expected from the docent. 1 cent each, I asked the docent, offering the copper coins, and he raised his hand and shook his head. You're all VIPs. Go on in and enjoy all the fares we have to offer. Although do remember, the prize in the center of it all is something that has to be sought after. Most people won't go further than the countryside. But as for mini quests, going to the end as fast as you can isn't the best answer. Slow down, take your time, and remember, he leaned back and spoke in his best announcer voice. Welcome, welcome, welcome to the pumpkin house. Please enjoy, he said with a smile as we passed by the gates to get to the countryside. This part of the pumpkin house grounds changed the least year to year. It was a lot like most other fall festivals. Booths selling food, booths with games for prizes, face painters, and many other fun things to do. I headed first to a dart booth that had stuffed animals for prizes. The carnival worker had one eye and one arm missing as he handed me the darts in exchange for a single copper coin. Dylan was sitting in a chair to get his face painted. Autumn and Summer were waiting for pumpkin spice flavored apple cider, and Kel was staring at a scarecrow that had a raven on top of its head. People were already having fun, and I still had Fallen Grace, who was standing on the table, getting darts for herself. What prize are you looking for? She asked me, and I pointed to some thing on the top shelf. It didn't quite resemble any creature that I knew. It was bone white with 4 legs and big black eyes. I loved the creature, just looking at it. Something about the shape and the eyes convinced me that it was a perfect stuffed animal to take home. I want that thing, whatever it is. I want it, I love it, and I need it, I said, pointing at the creature that was definitely going home with me tonight. The carnival worker looked at the creature I was pointing at before he grunted and answered. That's called Yippee. My kid likes it, he said before I turned to Fallen Grace, and I jumped from one foot to the other while telling Fallen Grace, win it for me, please, please, please. I'm really bad at these games and I need that Yippee, I told her while she shook her head. You won't learn anything if I win it for you, she said as she flew up to carefully lift up her dart as she threw her dart at a half-deflated balloon, causing it to pop. All right, I will win that Yippee. I can win things for myself, I said as I threw my own dart towards the balloons. My dart flew way off and hit the carnival worker directly on his eye patch. Oh gods, I'm so sorry, I told the carnival worker, who only grunted in response, pulling the dart out of his eye patch. That's fine, it happens all the time. Next time, aim for the balloons, he said, handing the dart back to me, while Falling Grace stood on the table, faking a yawn to avoid laughing at me. All of her darts were already in a balloon, and I took my time, aiming carefully as I threw the dart with all of my might. This time it hit the balloon, but it bounced off. I will get it, I said to no one in particular as I threw the other 2 darts, one right after the other. One hit the board embedding into it, and the other didn't even reach the distance. Better luck next time. Want to try again? The worker asked as I threw down my coins to throw again. This repeated 4 more times before I gave up. 6 centi spent, I did not manage to pop a single balloon. Falling Grace won a 2-legged smiling cat from the carnival worker, with a promise that the prize would be sent to her after she was done in the pumpkin house. By that point, all of my friends were there and watching me struggle to throw a single dart to burst a balloon. Summer and Autumn both had identical drinks, with an extra for Kel and Dylan. Fallen Grace quit laughing, and now she looked a bit concerned. Dylan had a large black widow spider with a spider web on his cheek. Everyone already had something while I was busy trying to win. I think that's enough for me. Let's find something else to play, I said as we wandered off, with Kel staying behind to speak to the carnival worker. While we wandered away to grab a lavender latte for myself when I noticed something. There were no children in the countryside. There were plenty of things that were made for children: hay rides, face painting, even a much smaller corn maze than the last time I was here. But there were no children at all. Just a few wandering adults and some teenagers, but it felt almost empty in the countryside. Fall festivals are always full of children, and when they aren't there, where could they be? Where are the children? Has anyone seen them anywhere? I asked, and everyone shook their heads as Kel rejoined us before he had a recommendation. Maybe we should ask the Scarecrow. He seems to know a lot, he says, pointing to the Scarecrow, who was having a much larger gathering of crows around him. Why the Scarecrow? I asked before Kel answered. He has a raven that wears a hat. That is the surest sign of wisdom. The Scarecrow is wearing a hat, and that is why we should trust him? Dylan asked Kel incredulously. What? Don't be ridiculous. The raven is wearing a hat, so that proves the raven is wise. The Scarecrow is wise for being friends with the raven, Kel said, and I nodded, agreeing with his point. Yeah, he's got a point, Autumn said. Definitely, but if the raven doesn't know, where do we go next? Summer asked. Let's start one step at a time before we start worrying about the next step. If we spend too much time wondering about what the next step it would take, we will never take the first step, I told my friends as we made our way to the Scarecrow. The Scarecrow hung from a wooden stake, surrounded by ravens who all stared at us. We approached the Scarecrow, and with everyone else nervous, I asked the Scarecrow, Scarecrow, can you tell us where the children are? I asked the Scarecrow, dressed in flannel and overalls with straw sticking out of his clothes, with a head seemingly made out of burlap. There was silence for a long moment before a small voice spoke just on top of the Scarecrow's head. Why are you asking the Scarecrow? You know he's not alive, the Raven said. A white stripe on his chest, and he wore a very small top hat on his head, which I do admit made him look very dapper. Oh, no, I didn't know that, but pleased to meet you. I'm Marceline, and you are? I asked the raven, who idly preened his wings before he answered my question. I'm Edgar. Pleased to meet you, young prince. So what brings you to the king of the Corvids? He asked. And before I could answer, Autumn whispered to Summer. I wonder if he's going to say nevermore, she said with a snicker, while Edgar let out a long sigh. First of all, fuck you. Second of all, if you're going to be rude, you will find that everyone will help you nevermore, Edgar said while Summer silently tried to shush her sister. Sorry about that rudeness, but I noticed there's no children in the countryside. I was hoping you could tell me where they are all at. I have a feeling like cobwebs in my mind, something that tells me it's important, but I can't remember why, asked the king of the Corvids, who pecked at the head of the Scarecrow, for he answered. Are you sure you want to know? I can just tell you the children are safe and you can move on. You can live in ignorance and move on, buy some masks and head into the hay maze. Just know right now you have the choice between knowledge and safety. You cannot choose both, Edgar said ominously, but I answered with ease. I choose knowledge. I don't think my nature would accept something else, I said while my friends agreed with me. Edgar tilted his head. Fascinating choice, but to answer your question, the children are kept in the hay fort. Though you'll never get in looking like that, you may have to find a mask that can disguise yourself. You will find a stall that sells masks, but be warned, any mask worn too long becomes your face, Edgar said, and I nodded. I think I understand. Thank you, Edgar. Let's go, everyone. Quick question, Kel asked. Never use the words quick question around me again, but what is your question? I asked. Can we go to the bathroom first? Yeah, absolutely, I need to go also. Anyone else? Awkwardly, everyone raised their hands, and I could hear Edgar snickering. First, the bathroom. Then we grabbed snacks. Why snacks? Autumn asked. I'm hungry. Then we check out the masks. And then we head to the hay fort, I said, trying to lead the group awkwardly to the bathroom stalls. Then we grabbed some overpriced corn dogs that the carnival worker told me was called the Heartbreaker. I didn't quite get it, but I'm sure it's some kind of adult joke. That wasn't one I could understand at all. As we ate our snacks, we made our way to the only stall that was selling masks in the entire countryside. The name on the stall was Justin Pine's Pine Masks, a clever pataphysical pun that no one seemed to get except for you. The man at the stall was a young man with a short, scraggly beard who sold pins and magnets alongside his masks. I could see Kel examining some of the skull-shaped pins, and Dylan was excitedly shaking the booth seller's hand. Apparently he recognized him from Share My Day. Autumn and Summer were bored and looking over the magnets for something they'd like, though they weren't into the old-fashioned monsters. While Grace only sighed as she sat on my shoulder. I don't think they have anything in my size, but I should be easy enough to sneak in. But if you can you get me a Jolly Roger magnet? She asked me while I stuck my tongue out at her. Why don't you pay for it yourself? You know, you have money too. I'm not exactly rolling in it. I told her, and she made a big show of digging into her pockets. Can't fit any money in these pockets. I can pay you back when we get home. Wait, hold on. I think I found something. Actually, two somethings. She removed her hands from her pockets with both of her middle fingers lifted up at me. She could be a handful, even just being 18 centimeters tall. I did chuckle at her show. Still, as I pulled the Jolly Roger magnet aside, I also checked over the masks. There were plenty of latex masks of incredible details. I could see a part man and part fly abomination, where the compound eyes seemed to follow me. I could also see a snarling lycanthrope where the fur was soft to the touch and the latex was warm to the touch. I nodded to myself as I understood what was happening here. The ominous warning of a mask worn too long becomes the face, the hyper-realistic masks, the way they feel warm to the touch, and they followed me. The masks were possessive. If I put it on for too long, it would start to change my behavior and possibly become impossible to remove. I couldn't just say anything, though. Challenge has to be a challenge, and if I try to reveal it too soon, that will only convince the house to try harder. Still, I could be careful, and I could pay attention to any ominous warnings. Pataphysical awareness comes in handy, especially if you understand the genre of the story the house is trying to give you. Still, though, such stories also have twists, and the twist may feel like it comes out of nowhere, but it has to exist in a way that can be understood, even if only in hindsight. So now I was being on guard from such twists. My hands flit over the masks until I found one that seemed to interest me. It was a simple mask, masquerade style, with beautiful red sequins and black checkerboard patterns. Every other mask was a hyper-realistic monster. Why was this one a masquerade mask? And why did it stand out to me? I picked it up and I brought it over to Justin, who was still chatting with Dylan. How much for this masquerade mask? I asked him, and he took one look at it. Oh, for you? I'm afraid the price is too much for someone like you to pay, he said with a sudden tone change he did not have with Dylan. Ah, so this was part of the game. He was being vague about the price, so this must be the mask that the house wants me to take. Why don't you Tell me the price and I can decide if I can pay it or not, I asked him. I could have just put it down or even walked away if it was anywhere else. Knowing when to walk away is a great negotiation tactic. However, here in the pumpkin house, it wasn't about the price. Not in this situation. It was telling a story where I was a character. If I acted logically, or even if I was rude back, then it would ruin the story. Playing along was the right way to keep the story going. Otherwise, the house will have to correct the plot, and that can get messy. Well, it's the kind of price that if you understand it, then you have to pay it. If you put it down, then you can look at other masks. I have a lovely Harlequin mask that is much cheaper and made from real Harlequin material, he offered. And I knew I had a choice, but I just had to mask. You used Harlequin skin to make a mask? I asked him, more than a little thrown off by what he was suggesting. What? No, Harlequin books. Do you think I'm a monster? He asked, showing me a full Harlequin mask, also with black and red checkered sequins with a sinister smile. Though I do admit that was definitely a lot better looking than the mask I was looking at. Now, at a mental crossroads, I thought it out for a second. Right now, Justin was the harbinger, warning me against buying what was in my hands right now, and he's offering me something else. If I take what he's warning me against, that would warrant a punishment, usually for ignoring the warning. If I take what he is offering, though, that would mean no punishment is needed. However, that is only true if I think of it like a horror movie from the 2730s. Those rules apply, then. However, beforehand, sometimes the one who is helpful is actually offering something harmful. If that is the case, then by following his advice, I would actively be aiding in my downfall by trusting a seemingly helpful stranger. That was classic in the old fairy tales about mysterious merchants, that what they offer is actually extremely harmful, and by understanding how it worked, it either ends in your death or some cosmic vengeance on yourself. However, if it is a modern tale, then the story isn't about the merchant at all. It's about how I would act in the situation. The point of the story wouldn't be to put me in situations, it would be about getting me to improve myself. The first act in the story is about showing how I normally act with all of the advantages and drawbacks. And then as I learn my lessons, I would grow and change, regardless of what choice I make. Choice is my own. There will be advantages and disadvantages, and trying to predict what is going to happen will actively work against me, because even making the choice to think clearly and plan things out is still a choice, and that choice will still have an effect on the narrative. Thinking pataphysically gets exhausting, especially in pataphysical nexuses like the pumpkin house. There is the narrative below me and the narrative above me. Understanding the narrative below me was simple enough. The masks were going to affect me in some way, and I would have to handle that problem. Thinking above it were understanding what the masks represent and how that would mean that I can handle the problem effectively was a lot harder. All these thoughts went through my head as my blank face was showed to Justin, and he broke character a bit to ask, "Hey, are you okay?" "Yeah, she's fine. She just gets that way when she thinks too deep," Fallen Grace told him while he nodded, and then he clarified. "The Harlequin mask is only 10 centi," he said, trying to make it tempting while I shook off an upcoming headache. At this point, I cannot predict the narrative. What I can do is make a choice, and the choice will put me on a quest one way or the other. So I will choose the choice that closest fits the kind of person that I am. Sure, the Harlequin mask looks great. Can you tell me all about the mask, please? I asked as I pulled out 10 copper coins from my purse, and he handed me the mask along with the receipt, as a smile crossed his lips. Well, the mask represents a jester in a play called The Tragedy of the Hanged King, a comedic character that may have a more sinister part to play in the tragedy. That specific mask was one of only 5 come directly from the last play held in Vandenberg. And as I can see, your friends have great interest in the other 4 masks from the tragedy. And sure enough, I noticed that my friends were interested in the other masks. Autumn was looking over a mask that was plain silver, with no mouth and only a single eye free on the left side. Summer had an identical golden mask with only the eye on the right side free. Those masks represent 2 different sisters of the Hanged King. One tried to kill the king, the other warned the king of murder. So he punished one sister by hanging her from the sky, turning her into the moon, and the other he rewarded by also hanging her, and she became the stars. Creepy, Autumn said, examining the inside of the mask. But fitting, Summer said, examining her mask from the front, trying to see if there were any imperfections. Kel was looking over a mask that looked a lot like a classic plague mask, except it was all black and there were black feathers along the back of it, allowing him to look a lot more bird-like if he was to put the mask on. He was also wearing his arrow ace pin with pride on his shirt. Ah yes, the ambassador of Alagata. A very important role, the most loyal subject of the king, one that is feared by all who he approaches. Though despite how dangerous he is loyal to the king. Even at the end of the play, when the Hanged King ordered his death, the ambassador eagerly hung the king without a single objection, before then hanging himself. Some say he was even in love with the Hanged King, though who is to say? And it was the final mask that Dylan held that was the strangest. It had a crown on top that he was expected to wear, but the mask was almost like a veil that descended around his head, surrounding his head like a wedding veil or like La Llorona's sheet. Even as a mask he was holding in his hand, the mask gave me extremely ominous vibes. Unlike everything else so far, this actually felt like this might be a real threat to me. And that mask represents the Hanged King, a powerful tyrant that was so powerful he had to be tied to his throne. Even from his throne, unable to move, he manipulated others to do his bidding, and had his loyal ambassador to do all that he wanted. And as he descended further and further into madness, he ordered the deaths of his sisters, then his people, then eventually ordered his own death and the death of his ambassador, leaving only one person in all of Alagata alive. Justin pointed towards me directly. Is Jester? I asked, looking down at the Jester's mask. Now it felt more sinister, though now I understood why he wanted me to grab that specific mask. There was a part we were to play, and it had something to do with the tragedy of the Hanged King. It rang a bell somewhere in my mind, but I had no answer. Well, thank you so much, Justin. We will take good care of these masks, but I do have to ask, is there somewhere where we can buy backpacks? I think we're going to need them. I asked in Hebrew character again. Oh yeah, sure. Right over there, they have quite a few hiking backpacks and purses for sale. Thank you so much for your business, he said as we walked away, and we agreed to wait to put on the masks until we got a lot closer to the hayfords. Well, Kel, do you think that everyone is aware of what is happening in a pataphysical way? No, they do not. Do you understand what is happening in a pataphysical way? No, I do not. Do you think I understand what is happening in a pataphysical way? No, you do not. What makes you say that? If you understood what was happening, you would have explained it to me as soon as I said I didn't understand it, and then I would be able to understand what is happening. But because you didn't explain once I said I didn't understand, that means you don't understand what is happening. I tilted my head as I turned to him, and then I turned to Fallen Grace as we exchanged the same look, saying, "You would have to be really smart to be this dumb." "How well do you understand pataphysical theory?" "I can spell pataphysical theory," he responded in a deadpan voice. "I cannot tell if you're joking or not." "That's not a joke. I can spell pataphysical theory," he responded, and I let out a sigh. Basically, there is a story within the story, and then there is a story around the story. You have a situation that is fantastical or supernatural in some way to draw attention, and then you have something relatable so people in the story can relate to the characters, or at least follow along, and then you have a lesson or even a theme. Not necessarily in a fable sort of way, but kinda like in a fable sort of way. Now imagine that you are a character in that fable. You know you're in a fable, you can control your actions, but you don't know what lesson you're going to learn is going to be. If you understand the lesson, then you can predict where it's going to go. But if you don't know the lesson, then you're stuck in a story where you will keep bouncing around so you finally fall on the right path, but you don't know where the right path is. Oh, so it's like one of our labs in school. I don't follow. There's a lesson. We know the class. We know that there's something we need to learn. But even if we're all given the same materials, we are learning something different to get to the same point. Some things come easier to others and some things come harder. Some people are learning things for the first time, others are relearning things. But no matter how much we understood before the lab, we are going to learn more in the lab. There will be a challenge for us, and we cannot predict what we need to study for, or even what to learn, because if we predicted everything before it was going to happen, then there would be something different to learn. So now we are in one of those learning labs. You're trying to apply old lessons to the new lesson, but because what is happening isn't exactly how it works in the old lessons, it is leaving you confused, and now you wonder if you're not understanding things at all. However, you are understanding everything just fine. You just cannot predict what is going to happen, because by predicting what is going to happen, it changes the outcome of what is going to happen. I finished for him, and I quietly wondered again who the hell was Kel to grasp complex pataphysical theory and be able to sum it up again in an easy to understand way. I wonder if that has anything to do with the tragedy of the Hanged King. I wondered out loud. "What do you mean?" Kel asked, while Fallen Grace flew over by Dylan, Autumn, and Summer, while they talked about some of the costumes worn by the guests around us. Well, think about it this way. Tropes come from somewhere. Out of context, a trope can be simplistic or even easy to understand, such as There and Back Again. It's a story with tropes such as a main character being called to adventure by a wizard. He has a trait that helps everyone that he himself didn't know that he had in the beginning of the story. Out of context, that has been done quite a lot. In context, he does things such as steal a magic ring, sneak by trolls, and escape goblins, because his secret trait that he didn't know he had was being a burglar. Outside the context, the trope is easily understood. In context, though, there is a lot of dimension added to it. We have to sneak by monsters using disguises. We are given an ominous warning of a mask worn too long becomes the face. So clearly these masks will either possess us or change us in some way if they're on too long. However, when Justin references a story that none of us has even heard of, That means there's dimension and context to it. Context we don't know. Changes things like a MacGuffin into a ring of power. It turns star-crossed lovers into Helen and Paris, Mark Antony and Julius Caesar. All very different stories with very different twists and turns. So now I don't know where this will go, I told Kel as I shook my head and looked down at my Harlequin mask. The weight was heavy, and I knew there was going to be a burden with it, but not knowing what that burden was heavier than the actual burden. I don't know where it's going either, but that's a lot of the fun. Stories are fun because you can't always predict where they go. Part of the fun of going somewhere like a haunted house is because they're different each time. There's changes, actors trying new things, new scares are done, and they adjust it, often person to person. So all we can do is our best and have fun, and we will make it through. So don't try to predict what will happen next, but instead just have fun with the next surprise. Kel said with some wisdom before he got immediately distracted. Ooh, they have green, he said as he grabbed the green backpack for himself. I smiled at his words and I grabbed a red and black checkered backpack for myself, and everyone except Fallen Grace grabbed a backpack. Nothing in your size? I asked her, and she flipped me off again. Next time we're going to Grimsburg, she said, muttering to herself. Everyone was now prepared, so we made our way to the hay fort. The hay fort was at the northern edge of the countryside, and it also served as the entrance to the hay maze. The fort was 4 stories tall and surrounded by a half-meter deep moat that was full of jack-o'-lanterns. Each one lit and smiled up at us as we turned to each other. It was our last chance to sneak by the monsters. We need to be careful. When we no longer need the masks, we need to take them off. I told my friends and they nodded, all thinking the same thing that I was thinking. I looked down at my mask and I took a deep breath as I put it on my face and tied the straps underneath my hair. Kel put on his crow mask and it fit him well enough. He tilted his head and his voice sounded muffled underneath the mask. Autumn put on her silver mask, her voice unable to be heard from underneath the mask. Summer put on her golden mask, and again her voice was muted, so we had to use sign and body language to communicate. It was Dylan's transformation that was the hardest to watch. Dylan was always nervous. He often had a hard time fitting in with everyone else, and he always protected his chest, and he often fiddled with his ring. When the Hanged King's mask was put over his head, he stood up straight for the first time ever. I didn't realize he was so tall. I wasn't short, but now he towered over us all. He still spoke, and he still sounded like himself, but his tone? He did not speak like a nervous undergrad. He spoke with power. Let's go, he said, and we followed. Falling Grace hidden in my shirt pocket as we headed into the hay fort. The first thing we noticed was that there were lights hidden in the hay to light it up, and we had 2 paths laid before us. A sign pointing towards a direction that said truth, and one that said safe. Dylan held up one finger, then he pointed at me before pointing towards safe. It was obvious what he wanted me to do. I nodded as I crawled down the small path. As I crawled forward, I thought about my own thought process. I expected there to be a change I could feel, or at least notice, but as far as I could tell, nothing changed in my thought process. My actions were still my own, and every thought fit my own patterns. So that either meant that the mask was exerting a subtle kind of control, even more subtle than I could detect, which is terrifying, or the mask was just a mask. which is far more terrifying. I exited out of the path marked safe into another part of the countryside. It was isolated from everything else, but just like the rest of the countryside, it had food trucks, booths with face painting, plenty of drinks, and even stands for pictures to be taken. The difference? It was full of parents and their children. I could see it was full of normal children and parents running around. Clearly, there was no dark secret here. They just had a separate section just for the parents and the children. A part that is completely separate from the story arc where the children could have fun in peace. After a moment, my friends joined me and we were in agreement. There was no danger here. The children were safe. We were about to head back into the hay fort when I felt Fallen Grace squirm in my pocket. Look again. It isn't right, she whispered, and I turned, and again, everything was completely normal. But still, she kept insisting, so I decided to look again. I opened up some of my senses, and that was when I realized I was still wearing the mask. For some reason, it was restricting my ability to see things, and I very carefully removed my mask, and I looked again as I peeked through without the jester's mask on. The park was a lot darker without the mask on. I could see that the stalls were overturned, and there laid many bodies on the ground. In front of me, only a meter away, was the broken doll. Her head was twisted around completely. Her face was half burned, leaving only a single eye left in her head. Her hair was half ripped out and the other half was tangled up. Her clothes were torn and coated in bloody mud. Her legs were bent the wrong way and her left arm was draped over a bundle in the mud. Her right arm was nowhere to be seen. The doll was not a doll. The enemy had made it here and we had to leave immediately. Get back to the hay fort. This place is gone, I told everyone as I put my mask back on, and we quickly crawled back into the hay fort. Now we only had one more path to go. Truth. As we crawled back in the hay fort, I noticed something we didn't see before. Underneath the dirt and the hay was a single mirror on the ground, so when we crawled, we had no choice but to see ourselves as we made our way forward. In the reflection, I couldn't see the jester's mask, just my own face smiling back when I was definitely not smiling. Mark's truth did not require crawling, but on the hay walls there were mirrors all over the hay, randomly interspaced, so every once in a while you turn a corner, then see your own reflection. Except it isn't your face you see the mask you wear. We traveled in near silence as we made our way deeper into the hay maze. We expected fear and scares, but we did not expect that. It was like a war zone, and now here we were in the hay maze trying to find the crossroads. This was tougher than the corn maze. There we could head into the corn, and here there were hay to our sides, hay above us, and hay below us. When we made one right turn, we found stairs made out of hay, heading up, path to the right, and a way forward. Where do we go? Dylan asked me, and I looked at our choices. Forward led deeper into the darkness that I couldn't see if it turned or if it kept going forward. The path to the right, which immediately turned right again, so would either lead to a dead end or it would be non-Euclidean because we would have seen it. Up the stairs led to a more of the three-dimensional hay maze. And of course, there was the way we came from, but we know that isn't the way out because that was the way we came from. Wait, there were 4 different ways to go. We can go up, forward, right, or the way we came. We found the crossroads. We found the crossroads. We just have to find the fifth way, and we found our way out, I said excitedly, and we all started to examine the hay walls around us. There was dirt on the ground, there was hay all around us, and nothing else, not even a mirror. But once again, Fallen Grace squirmed as she said, right there, underneath the stairs, there's another stairway heading down, she said, pointing where I could only see dirt. Trusting Fallen Grace, I motioned for the others to also take off their masks, and sure enough, with our masks off, we could see that there was another stairway that led down, made out of wooden planks, that we could see that there was another tunnel down. Come on, and keep the masks off, we have another test, he said as I put the jester's mask away inside my backpack as I traveled down the stairs. Each step echoed through the earthen tunnel as we made our way forward, with myself leading. Each step forward in the darkness, I felt fear try to creep in, so I had to keep myself brave. I only knew one way to do so. Deep breath in, deep breath out. In the darkness, my hair changed length. Deep breath in, deep breath out. My skin itches underneath my jacket that I forgot I was wearing. Deep breath in, deep breath out. My fear is deep inside of myself as I step forward into the light as Red Prince and Mark Pierce is deep inside of myself. As I step into the light, the first monster steps forward into the light in front of me. It stood even taller than Dylan. The high shoulder collar was red, while most of the outfit was black and very formal. In one hand they carried an axe, and in the other a long whip made out of a human spine, and they had no head on their shoulders at all. Our first monster we had to convince that we were a monster was a Doulahan, a headless horseman that was powerful enough that if it said our name, it would kill us, and if it stopped moving, someone would die. One that drove a death coach made from human skin and bone, whose horse was just as headless as him and just as deadly. Even among the many terrifying fae of Hibernaria, Doulahan was uniquely horrible, being nearly impossible to defeat, only able to be scared off with gold. However, gold was not something I had, and scaring off the horseman wasn't the same thing as getting past him. We had to convince him that we were monsters ourselves while we had no masks on. I had to play this very carefully. May we please pass? I asked the monster politely. No fear in my heart, no hesitation in my voice, and no doubt in my eyes. I spoke with politeness, but in a tone that made it clear I expected politeness from the Doulahan as well. The Doulahan did not hesitate before stepping to the side for us. Being polite, but acting as we belonged was the secret here. If we acted in fear, or even doubt, that would have caused the Doulahan to sense that we didn't belong. By acting like we belonged, it allowed us to belong. As I passed, I saw the Doulahan's head sit on a shelf. The head blinked and whispered to me as I passed by. It's good to see you again, Red. We all missed you. He whispered in my ear as I passed by into the darkness, and my friends followed. The first test passed. Trying to act tougher than the Doulahan or even try to intimidate it would fail embarrassingly, and it would reveal the fact that you don't belong. When you get to beings as powerful as the Doulahan, they don't need to act tough. They don't need to intimidate. The only people who weren't afraid were the idiotic, or those that belonged. We continued down the darkness when another figure appeared from the darkness, stepping beneath a single incandescent bulb. The woman wore a paper surgical mask over her mouth, but it was not quite big enough to cover the rips in her cheeks, making her mouth a permanent smile. Even with her hands free, I knew she was still armed. She was very popular in Nippon, but she also was well known here, often asking a single riddle that if answered wrong she would either kill or she would make her foe match her face. I will have 3 questions for each of you. Answer them correctly to go on. Only a monster could answer these questions correctly. So know that even if one of you gets a single question wrong, that all of you may not pass, the woman said as she pointed at Dylan first. What is your quest? To find the center of the pumpkin house. What is a skeleton's favorite snack? Spare ribs. I have a name, but it isn't mine. You don't think about me while in your prime. People cry when I'm in their sight. Others lie with me all day and night. What am I? A tombstone, Dylan answered quickly, and the woman nodded as she removed a knife from her pocket to play with in her hands. Very well. Now you. She pointed directly at Fallen Grace, who left my pocket to start flying now that we made it past the hay fort. What grows stronger when hope gets weaker? Despair. What rises when the sun goes down? The moon. How do you spell candy in 2 letters? Fallen Grace thought for a moment before she smiled and answered, C and Y. Fallen Grace and the woman both giggled like they were sharing an inside joke, and after the chuckle was over, she pointed over to Autumn. The more I grow, the smaller I get. What am I? A candle. What can be touched but cannot be seen? A person's heart. Do you trust me? She asked Autumn, who paused before she answered. No. Somehow, beneath the paper mask, the woman smiled even wider, but then she turned to Summer. The shorter I am, the bigger I am. What am I? A temper. What can be seen but cannot be touched? A shadow. Do you trust me? Now it was Summer's turn to pause before she answered. Yes. This also made the woman smile wide, and I could tell from both Autumn and Summer's expression that they weren't trusting each other right now as the woman turned to Kel. What is a crime that no judge can forgive? Killing the judge. What are you? According to my father, a son of a bitch. According to my mother, a son of a bastard. So I guess that makes me a bastitch. What is the average airspeed velocity of an unburdened European swallow? 32.4 kilometers per hour or 9 meters per second. Kel answered with ease, and the woman put her knife away and just stared more at Kel. Seriously, what are you? 4 questions is too many, that wasn't our deal, Kel said as she sighed and she turned to her last victim, myself. And I could tell from the twinkle in her that she was not planning on making it easy for me. To all things and men I appertain, and yet by some am shunned and disdained. Fondle and ogle me till you're insane, but no blow can harm me, cause me pain. Children delight in me, elders take fright, fair maids rejoice and spin, cry and I weep, yawn and I sleep, smile and I shall grin, she said, and it bounced around in my head for a moment. After a moment, I remembered a story with the same riddle, and then the answer came to me. You are a mirror, or more accurately, a reflection. I said, and her smile dropped for a moment, just for a moment, and somehow her lack of a smile was even worse than having a smile, before it returned and she had another question. Rise and fall every day. My face is as pale as bone, red as blood, and as dark as night. I am reliable as time and as fickle as shadow. You can search for me all day and never find a trace. Yet you shut off the light and you will gaze on my face. What am I? The woman asked, her knife shining in the darkness. At first I wanted to answer knife, since it could be pale, red, or dark, except something caused me to stop. Knives aren't inherently reliable and they don't hide during the day. Something as reliable as time and as fickle as shadow. Gaze on a face in darkness but not seen in daylight? Oh, of course, the answer is obvious now. The moon, I told her, and her smile was now a frown. I could hear in her voice, and I could see in her eyes. She was not expecting me to answer it correctly. Everyone else, she was smiling, except Kel. She was just confused with Kel, but to be fair, that was his normal state of being a force that confused all who surrounded him. She was treating me like I was a threat, and that only meant she would try and find any fault in me. Your final question, the one everyone is able to answer. What is your name? She asked me, and my heart nearly stopped. In this form I was in right now, I am Red Prince. An easy answer, but inside of myself I could feel doubt blossom inside of me. Doubt called Marceline Pierce. I wanted to ignore her, but that would be ignoring myself and her own wisdom. As the struggle played inside of myself, I could see the woman's smile start to return. She had me. She was certain. She was just giving me enough time to struggle so she could savor it. I wouldn't let her savor my struggle. I opened my mouth to speak when Marceline's voice screamed in my head, Stop. That's what she wants. Don't rush the answer. Let us answer together, not apart. She said in my voice, and I spoke in the dim light. My name is Red Prince, detective of River City. I said in confidence in the dim light as the woman lunged forward in the darkness towards me, only for me to step aside as she plunged her knife into the earthen wall, while I changed in the darkness. In the darkness my hair grew again and my jacket disappeared as the last of the Red Prince slid back into myself. I stepped back into the light with long hair and my makeup returned. I am Marceline Pierce, I said simply as the woman silently cussed to herself. You may all go forward. Be warned, the last of us is the hardest to fool. So if you are not a monster, you cannot go past them. And I promise you that it'll be even tougher than naming yourself. The woman promised as she slid into the dark, taking her knife with herself. We continued forward into the maze where there was a dead end. And there I heard confusion ahead as I made my way through the friend group. When I made it to the front, I saw the dead end was in a full-length mirror underneath an incandescent bulb. Inside the mirror was just myself. My own reflection. At first, I was confused. I was expecting a monster inside the mirror, not a plain mirror, but then I made the connection. I saw the glint in the reflection's eye and a slight smile on her lips that wasn't my own. Oh, the final test. We are the third monsters. That's why it's impossible for anyone who isn't a monster to bypass it. Because if anyone is lying about being a monster, then they cannot fool themselves. You can lie to others, but lying to yourself is a lot harder. So it's a good thing that we made it here, I said before the reflection started laughing. You sure have had it all figured out, haven't you? Just like you figured out that the masks will possess you, only to later realize they just change how the world looks around you. How someone like you would make it this far, I will never know, the reflection said, and I just shrugged. Playing a very dangerous game, but knowing I had to play it cataphysically. I saw the fact that the reflection in all the mirrors didn't quite match, and the fact it didn't reflect our masks, but if I let it think I didn't understand, then I would make it through. Okay, so you aren't what I thought, but we are still monsters. May we please pass through? I asked the monster in the mirror, who only chuckled in my voice. What monsters? I see no fangs, no claws, no scars, nothing that tells me you're monsters. I just see six scared children who deserve to wait in safety in the countryside, where the children are safe, the monster said, and I only shook my head. We are monsters. We saw what happened to the children without masks on our faces. We saw the truth rather than safety. What does that make us in your eyes? I asked the reflection, who only nodded. The mirror moved as we were allowed to pass, stepping out of the darkness into the tunnels and into the twilight of the Railyard. As we made it through, Fallen Grace asked me, I don't get it. If we aren't monsters in his eyes, why does choosing truth over safety allow us to continue? What does that make us if we're not monsters? It makes us heroes, heroes who get to continue on their journey.